Good morning. Thank you for all coming in today on this nice day after yesterday's excitement. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Jim Wright with Partners Resource Network. We're at Texas's PTI. We're doing this conference today called my collaboration with Region 10 ENC. So I want to thank them very much for all their hard work and being ready and having this great facility. Of course, most of you guys are here instead of here, but I thank you guys for signing up and joining as well. PTI is a Parent Training Information Center, and the IDA law, every state is required to have a PTI, and Partners Resource Network serves as Texas's PTI. We have 4 different projects. One thing I think is very interesting about how they created the law is that the majority of our employees have to have children with disabilities. And so I have a child that's 19, I guess he's not a child anymore, but he has Down syndrome, he has vision issues, and he's in the 18 plus program in Frisco ISD. And his younger brother, he started in special ed services when he was 3 with a speech delay. And then he found out he had apraxia, turned out he's dyslexic, and he's also gifted. So we had that 2E thing. And so we had a lot of difficulties getting him identified because intelligent masked disability and masked intelligence. So, but we got to figure it out, and he's doing great. And so I think they're both success stories of what IDA is all about, make them get their potential. And so I'm very happy to be in this position to help our region and our parents and our educators in here. And then, so I want to get kicked off today. We're having Tara here. Tara. She's off camera thing, so I got to scoot over so she can get in. We have to have this little area here that we have to fit. And so Tara has been working with children and families in various therapeutic capacities for over 20 years. She began her career as a special educator and has extended her passion for advocating and helping others in the realm of providing counseling services. Tara continues to work within schools as a counselor and as a private therapist in the Flower Mound area, where she operates from a strength-based, solution-based perspective. She specializes in helping individuals and family work through emotional and behavioral concerns related to trauma, social concerns, adjustment, and overall mental health. So Tara became familiar with us with my supervisor, Shannon. They were in a AR together. That is one of those ones that takes meeting after meeting after meeting to get people on the same page. And they realized they had a real good connection, and Shannon brought her in to speak, and Shannon said, you have to have her. She is so awesome. So no pressure.
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, the bar's kind of high, so thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so like you said, oh, thank you. I started as a special ed teacher myself a long time ago, and I taught a self-contained class for kids with behavioral issues, or basically difficulties regulating their emotions. That's what we call it now, right? And so from that, I became a behavior specialist and served an entire district. And Shannon and I met when, in a contentious art, actually, I was called in to kind of try to calm things down and talk about how we could, kids with behavioral issues are always a hot button in any situation and in any school. And so when the art was over, Shannon and I stepped out and she's like, you know what, I think it actually went really, really well. There weren't any issues, and we were both on the same page, talking about the same thing, really looking at how we could, support the kid. And so from then we've been working together in some capacity, usually doing presentations like this. So I do typically speak on behavior, but that's evolved over time, right? Because the way we understand kids and the way we understand behavior and how people interact with each other has also evolved over time. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking too about how much changed, but also how it's really stayed the same. Because even when I was working just in that behavior world, we would be looking at like, what are you doing? No, I'm just kidding.
I was trying to get, I'm really messing up your presentation. Trying to get that off the bottom.
This is to test her behavior.
Can I regulate my emotions?
Yes, you do well.
I'm just gonna leave you alone. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Anyway, I was just saying that we were looking at how things have changed, but also how they really haven't. Like when we would go in and back in the day, develop the behavior plans and try to figure out how we could help kids. We were looking at the basic needs that they were meeting, like all behavior serves a need, and what was that coming from? And even that is about connecting with people, right? If they want to communicate something, you're trying to connect, you're trying to interact with others in a specific way. So all of it is about connecting. So we call it different things over the years. So now we're talking about breaking barriers and building connections, but it's really the same. It's not rocket science, right? We know there are some things that work, and at the end of the day, people need that human connection. They don't always want it. Sometimes it's really hard for them, but people need to have that human connection. It's really, really important. So, which I think is part of the title, right? We're building bridges. Is that the name of the whole symposium today? But we're going to talk first about barriers and what it means, what barriers are. And I think, I hope there comes a day where we're not talking about the pandemic still, but it's a real thing. We're coming back from that, or we're just here now on the heels of that. And so obviously that is a big barrier that we've all had in the last couple of years. Things shut down, and we talked about, what's it going to be like when we return to school, and what's it going to be like after this? And we said then, it's probably going to be like, give us 3 years. I work in a high school also, and I work in it's transient. We have a lot of kids from other countries, and we thought, these kids are falling off the face of the earth. We're going to lose track of them. It's going to be 3 years, like give us a couple of years. And I think we're seeing that now, right? So we came back right after everything shut down and schools looked one way. And then the year after that, they looked another way, and they still look different today when we deal with those things. So continuing to deal with that. So when we talk about barriers today, what I'm talking about is really anything that's getting in your way. Like sometimes it's us, sometimes it's a person or a perceived situation. But when we talk about breaking down barriers, which is hopefully what we're doing, right? We don't want them to stop us from accomplishing what we need or getting what we want or getting what we need for our kids. But I think you need to be able to identify what that barrier is and be honest about it with yourself. Sometimes we're our own barrier. My own son has some hearing loss and hearing issues now, and this is new to us. So like he didn't have a disability 2 years ago, and now he does. He got meningitis. He's got some lasting issues from that. And so returned to school this year with a hearing aid, and and also transitioning to middle school, right? So I'm already a nervous mom. I know he's fine, like he's cool with it, but mom was like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? So we've got same thing. We've got that EE, the gifted program, and the 504 in place, and all this stuff. And right out of the gate, this teacher says, who he's already struggling with, and it's like day 4 of school, and tells him to take his earbud out. He's just telling me this in passing, and I did that. Yeah, it's like I wanted a meeting. I'm not happy. All of this, and then I thought, well, I was really the barrier there. Like if I go in hot in this teacher meeting, I've ostracized the teacher. I've come in a way with the teacher that's not going to serve him well in the classroom. And he wasn't bothered by it. He said, "That's my hearing aid," and they moved on. He likes it. It's kind of looks techie, and also like it helps him hear. So he's really happy to have it in all the time. So the real issue was me and the barrier that I have fear, right? I'm fearful about what this means for him long term. We're still adapting to it. I'm fearful about how this is going to impact his life. And so the barrier there was me, and not really the words that she mistook his hearing aid for, an AirPod. So again, it's really important that we be able to identify those barriers, be honest about what it is. And we're going to talk more about that when we are making plans for kids and really being focused on what it is that we need or that we want and what the goal is. So, but in short, with barriers, we want to make sure that we're focusing on moving forward. We can really get caught up in the muck of like what all the problems are. Yes?
Did she allow him to put the hearing aids after she understood that they were hearing aids?
Yeah, he had it in, and she was, I'm sure she was mortified. She'd never met him. It was the first day of school, and kids in middle school they have to take their earbuds out, and everybody's wearing like those wireless AirPods. And so she was just like, take it out. And he said, it's my hearing aid. And
okay, I understood it different. So
no, exactly.
The barrier that not smart.
But no, well, yes, she should be better informed. So then when we had our parent meeting, it just had a different tone, because initially, I wanted to come in like, how dare you? And also we'd had a meeting ahead of time, right? To say like, this is who he is because of the other, his, it was a GT class, and he has this 504, so I'd already had a meeting. But the bigger issue was that my fear was getting in the way of how I approached her. Not anymore. So anyway, yes, we can focus on the barrier, and we want to be careful not to get stuck there, right? So that we focus on what really is important. And this is an actual thing. In 2021, there was a World Happiness Report. So somebody's research out there is to conduct research on what makes people happy. And no shock to any of us, what they found is that increased connectedness to others, increased human connection leads to better mental health, more resilience, and greater life satisfaction overall. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, we all want to have better mental health, more resilience, and greater life satisfaction. So the trick is, like, how do you do that? So what does it mean to connect? And wonderful Brene Brown defines connection as the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, when they feel heard and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment. And if you think about the meetings that we're in, the people that we work with, how many of you are parents, professionals? Okay. I mean, are you here in the capacity as a parent? Yes. What's your capacity here today, parents or professionals? Parents? Okay. Professionals. Okay. So, but in all of those, I think about the meetings and the plannings that we sit in. It's important that we feel heard and that people feel valued. And when we don't have that, that in and of itself is a barrier. So in order to connect, we need to learn to navigate these times, the times that we're in right now, and sometimes just the meetings and the nature of that, they're intimidating. They can be, difficult. You're having to have, difficult conversations. And so the nature of what you're doing makes it hard before problems arise, right? Just on the best day, it's hard. So we want to be able to make sure we're communicating with understanding and empathy to one another. So here are a couple things that we know. It's just an understood. High levels of stress negatively impact your memory, impacts your ability to focus, your eating, your sleeping. Some of us overeat, some of us, but it can affect those things, right? It affects your basic functioning or your overall health. If you stop for a moment and think about optimum circumstances for learning, what do we need? We need to be able to focus. You want your memory intact. We need a good night's rest. When we were working with kids, anytime a kid comes into my office and they're having a bad day, I always start with, can I get you a water, and have you had breakfast today? Do you need a snack? So all of these things that are happening right now in our world that affect our mood are the things that we need to be in an optimal learning state. So it's important that we're mindful of that too. Also, I go into this slide is on any presentation, no matter the topic. I think it's important, and I do have this is my own kids right here, because my daughter saw this over my shoulder when I was working on it. She said, well, parenting is not hard for you because we're amazing. And while that is true, no matter how amazing our kids are, parenting is still hard. And on the very, very best day, it is humbling, it is scary, it's stressful, like none of us know what to do. And I think we are all just hanging on by a thread and doing the best that we can. Even if you've had, older kids and you're dealing with a situation with one of your younger kids, every situation is different, every person is different, the people on the other side of the table are different. So it is hard. And I think as parents, we need to give ourselves grace for that and just know, like, it is hard. And I don't know what I'm doing on any given day. I have a lot of training in the area, and I still don't know what I'm doing when it comes to my own kids. And as professionals, I think it's important that we're mindful of that when we're talking to parents and when we're working with them. Parents are sending us their very best, their most prized possession, and they're entrusting them with us. And we need to know how hard that is to let go. And I think sometimes we get focused on what needs to get done and we lose sight of that too. So it's really, really important. Also, this disruption in education, that big barrier we talked about, the pandemic, that has emphasized a critical role for parents. And parents were thrust into being, there was a time period when we were all shut down and we were all educators, whether we liked it or not, right? So parents have been put in this role they didn't ask to be in, that increased their level of involvement in their students' education, whether they were ready or not. My own kids, we did virtual for a while. They have never done worse than they did under my teaching, under the care of Miss Tara at home. So, it was hard, and I was an educator, but I didn't go to school to teach my own kids. It's a whole different thing. So parents are also in this role they didn't ask to be in, and that has just increased the difficulty and made it less of a separation between caregiving, parenting, teaching. So with that, your parents also have an increased level of stress and anxiety. And conversely, the teachers also have an increase in stress and anxiety. It used to be that, and I work a lot with principals, and when we first returned, the year we came back to school from being shut down, one of the principals I was working closely with was like, God, I can't do anything right. You know, the teachers are stressed, and no matter how many jeans days we give them, no matter how many snacks I bring in, they're stressed. You know, what can I do? And it was coming up on all these surveys. You know, the staff was miserable. Well, after the year, when we started to have committees again, they were just jumping to be on these committees. Well, I don't know if you work in the schools, but teachers aren't usually eager to join committees, not because they're not committed to the job, but because they already have so much on their plate. And what we learned from them when we went and talked to them about what did you love about your committee meeting, they loved the connectedness. They loved that they were back talking with people, that they were having that interaction. And so what we learned from this after the fact was that when they were upset and stressed during the school year, it was the separation. You know, we had the building broken down into zones, and it was all about keeping people safe, which was great and necessary. But what they were stressed, what was adding to their stress, and frankly, their misery, was this separation from everybody and the lack of connectedness and the inability to be with others and to have that human contact, even when it's difficult. So we found, again, how important that connectedness is. We also, when I was talking to the principal, she was saying, you know, I don't know what to do. We're doing all these things. And we looked at the fact that before, in years past, you could have stressful situations at home, and then you might come to school and leave it there. You know, you could leave it at home and have a break. Or you could have stressful situations at work. Work might be really, really busy and hectic, but you could leave that at work and go home. And when we had the pandemic and things shut down, and even when we went back to work, there wasn't that same separation because you were stressed, this increased level of stress at work and an increased level of stress at home, and it never went away. There was no escaping it, no matter where you were. And so again, that increased level of just angst and stress was present all the time. There's no getting away from it. So that, again, has affected our ability. It's a new barrier that affected our ability to connect with others. So what do we do about these? You know, we're navigating difficult times for sure, and we will continue to do so. Mental health is a part of your overall good health. You can't have a conversation about health and the well-being of children without being mindful of the mental health and how this affects everybody. I think one thing that has come out of this that has been positive is that, well, several things, but we are having more conversations about mental health, right? It's now it's a part of what we know. And I think prior to, we were going in that direction and trying to raise awareness, but now everybody knows what it is. We've got social emotional learning in our schools, standard, mandated. Everybody's getting it, not just for kids who have had outcries, but everybody recognizes the importance. So my hope is that raising some of this awareness will continue to reduce the stigma, make it more available to people. But definitely, you know, there is a heightened awareness, and also the accessibility for our kids. Like I had a kid the other day coming back talking to me about they were worried about the amount of time they were dissociating during the day and their neurodivergence and all this. So the kids are having access to information that they didn't have 7 years ago. When I was teaching, you know, nobody was self-identifying, they weren't self-diagnosing, and they certainly weren't making their own treatment plans, but kids are doing it these days. And I sometimes I'm like, what makes you think that you have psychosis? You know, like, where are you getting this from? So or, you know, when they're neurodivergent or atypical, you know, all these things that they, you know, so they're researching these things. They're coming up with their own IEPs, which, you know, I want to foster education, so it's great. But, you know, but I do think that with that, you know, those things can be risky. But overall, we're hoping that raising awareness about mental health and the fact that it's present and needs to be addressed, hopefully can, again, increase people's opportunity to access support and resources, but also decrease some of the stigma, which serves everybody well. In order to empathize someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine the experience to be. I think this is really, really impactful. A lot of times when somebody is going through something, we're very quick to say, it's not that big of a deal. This doesn't happen. And the truth is that we all operate from our own perceptions. If it is a big deal to me, it's a big deal. Sometimes getting out of bed in and of itself is a big deal. Sometimes being in a room filled with people is a big deal. For some of us, it's not. But we want to be really, really cognizant of each person's individual experience, because if it's a big deal to them, it's a big deal. And we have to be able to understand that. It doesn't have to make sense to us. We just have to know that if you're telling me this is stressing you out, or if you're telling me this is difficult for you, then it's difficult. It doesn't become not difficult just because I said so. So it's not. Trauma is anything that shakes your norm. And this can look different for everybody. Again, we keep going back to it. And like I said, I hope that there's a time that we're not using this as our reference point, but this is where we are. In the pandemic, one of the things that was traumatic for so many people, as I've talked about already, is that difficulty connecting to others, that inability to connect. Those people went into quarantine and into isolation and struggled. Others, and I had clients who literally said, I was, doing therapy, and of course it was virtual at that time, with a teenager who said, I think we can put this on pause. She said, we've been working on creating my happy space in the place that I'm comfortable. And she's like, and I'm there. She said, I am at home in my bed doing my schoolwork, she had really crippling social anxiety. And the fact that she was able to stay in her very favorite spot where she was most comfortable and complete her work, she's like, this is ideal. She said, so I'll call you when this is over. And she did, but that was real too. So, we had it on both sides. So those same kids, that kid now as a young adult is struggling to get back on the other side of things, right? So even though those experiences are very different, those of us who were troubled by being isolated and struggling to connect with others, and those that were in their happy place, well, they didn't have to struggle with this, that has now switched too. And so we are all dealing with that. So whatever it is that shakes somebody's norm, whatever it is that shakes somebody's sense of calm and sense of comfort and really their joy, whatever that may be for anybody, is real. And that could be our current situations. One of the other things that is going on, today I talked about kids being able to access things on the media, and they can have access to all kinds of information. That is not necessarily soothing, right? So they are constantly fed, constantly receiving input. And while that can be a form of connection, that's not necessarily positive or healthy. And that doesn't necessarily serve to reduce stress and make us feel better. So we have to be aware of that when we're working with individuals, or in our parenting too. What kind of input are they getting? And, is it constant? And when it is, they have access to it constantly. So what are we doing to manage that? So what do these things look like? And I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know here, but it can look like anxiety, panic attacks, increased irritability. If you have teenagers, this looks like teenagers anyway, but somatic complaints, they've got headaches, they've got stomach aches, isolating and avoidance, difficulty concentrating, feeling hopeless, anger outbursts. One thing that's really important to realize about when we're looking for these changes and concerns in kids is it can really be any change in behavior. So sometimes it's positive. That's the trick. It might be something we've hoped for. Maybe your child is suddenly wanting to be around you all the time. And while we crave that, I know there are days my kids are going to hate me, and so I try to relish the fact when they want to be around me right now because they're still young. But some of these things look like a desired behavior, something we've been hoping for. But if it is a change from the norm for them, we want to pay attention to it and find out what's causing that. That makes sense? So even if your child is usually more isolated and they're suddenly right at your side, that could be an indicator that something is bothering them or something is going on. I have a lot of teenage clients, that's kind of their trigger at home, or that's the warning sign when they are feeling like they're going kind of back into that hole of depression or back into a hole of anxiety. They cling to their parent. And so we pay attention to that, even though she loves their company. Or you're happy your kid wants to talk to you, that could be a sign of something. So we just want to be aware of all of these behaviors. It doesn't look like, especially if you have younger kids or kids that aren't verbal. When I worked with, when I was a behavior specialist in elementary school programs, people used to say, well, there was a lot of chair throwing, desk tipping. And they would always call kids angry. They were always angry. And sometimes we would, well, they're also, maybe they're sad, maybe they're depressed. What could it be? Maybe they're trying to tell us something. We didn't always have all the words for it back then, but, and the truth is that sad kids look angry. Kids that have communication problems can look angry and mad because they're trying to tell us something and they can't get it out. When they resort to, a lot of times, what is the quickest, and it's kind of a reflexive reaction. So we want to just watch for these changes when we're talking about behavioral changes and how people interact, because this is still about trying to connect with others when we see any of these things. Anxiety, they might be having difficulty in that area. So communication, we want to communicate to develop understanding. So this is different than communicating just to convey information, communicating to, you're not just calling in and saying somebody's got the flu today, they're sick. We want to practice communicating in order to develop understanding, because when we understand each other, we're able to connect. Remember when I talked in the very beginning about, those barriers and what really is our goal as a parent or our goal as an educator. If we're not conveying that message and they're not understanding where we're coming from, then we run the risk of the message getting lost or the goal not being seen, let alone not being reached. If we're not even working towards the same thing, we're never going to reach where we're trying to get to. Make sense? So it is important to know who we are, right? As a parent, what is my role? And as a professional, who do we serve? We're serving the kids, but you're serving the whole family. And sometimes all the way down the line. You're serving, sometimes multiple people in the family, kids and the adults. You can't work with the kids without working with the adults. We have to be cognizant of how learning occurs. So when we're doing, and creating educational plans and sitting in on those meetings, it's really, really important to be cognizant of how your child learns best. And if they don't know, we need to find out. So we need to have those conversations. And we need to be, when we're planning for kids, cognizant of how they learn best, what works best for them, and what works for you might not work for you. I know that makes our lives more difficult, but that's true. And everybody feels better when we're doing a good job. And these are the things we need to know, but we have to communicate these things for understanding. It's what the individual part of a plan is all about. And we need to be cognizant of what we need. And I talked about that in the very beginning. What is our end goal? What is the plan? What does this child need? On any given day, we're here in these different roles. We're here as an advocate. We're here as a parent. We're here as an educator. And it's important that we not lose sight of what it is that we really need. I was in court once with a family it was a single mom of a kid with autism, and she was fighting we were there to get child support. He owed her all this back child support. But what she really, really wanted was him to pay for her son's childcare. And that was what she needed. That was the big picture. And somewhere, as we sat there for 8 hours and we were waiting on this, it was getting lost, and we were hung up on this back child support pay, which she 100% deserves. There's no excuse for him not paying all of that. But the attorney, I remember him finally saying to her, what is it that you want? At the end of the day, he was like, you're not going to get that. And I just remember thinking, well, we would never say that in education, but the attorneys can talk to people a different way. And not that his words were not kind, but at the end of the day, what he was really saying is we need to focus on what it is that you really need. What is the goal here? And what she really, really wanted and what she needed long-term for her son was that he have health care. She needed him to be on his dad's insurance. That's what we were there for. And she had every right to be angry, and but he had 10 years of back pay. And the attorney's point in saying that was, we are never going to get this. You can't squeeze blood from a turnip, right? He didn't have that cash in hand to give her. That was not realistic. And that also wasn't what she really, really wanted. She was mad about it, and it was unfair, and all of that is valid. Her feelings were spot on. But at the end of the day, what she really, really needed and what she really wanted for her son was that he be covered with that insurance. Does that make sense? So sometimes, again, we get caught up in the details, and we get caught up about teachers are going to make mistakes, parents are going to make mistakes. None of us are perfect people. And it's important that when we talk about building connections, that we're coming from that place of hope and positivity, because we can get caught up in being angry, and we can get caught, and that doesn't make it not valid. And it doesn't mean you're not right, but if we can't move forward from that, we lose sight of what it is we really need. And we lose sight of what it is that the kids really need. And I will tell you right now, as an educator and someone who still works in schools, people are going to make mistakes. They do. There's going to be someone who says something they shouldn't. There's going to be somebody who doesn't understand your kid. There's going to be somebody who's having a bad day themselves and they say the wrong things. But at the end of the day, for us and for our kids, in order to keep those positive connections, we have to focus on what we need. Because we also say the wrong things sometimes at home. And, you know, we do, I mean, not you. Yes, right. I know, it happens. It happens. You know, we have those days, I always say this to kids too, like, if you ever roll out of bed and you're like, I just cannot, you know, you've been up 10 minutes and everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And you say to yourself, like, if one more thing happens today, I'm just going to lose it. And what always happens? Inevitably, within minutes, right? So we have to focus on be able to like, let that go and move forward. It's kind of what we were talking about. We have to be able to come from a place of hope. You know, hope in and of itself is that feeling and expectation for certain things to happen, but based in this expectation, this place of optimism. You know, you have the sense that it can be achieved. Some of these goals, when we are sitting in meetings with kids, and one of the things I loved about being a behavior specialist was I worked with families over a span of years. I had kids that was called in when they were under a table in pre-K, and I got to watch them graduate high school. You know, I saw them go from a kid who couldn't function within an educational setting in a way that was successful for a full day, and then watch them, you know, be a part of their peer group that you would not know had that difficulty as a younger kid. And so I loved being able to watch that span of growth within the kids. But every time we planned, we're coming from this place of optimism, this belief that they could change, that things could be different for this kid. It wasn't that they were like everybody else. It wasn't that, you know, I didn't care where they sat in the room or what it looked like. They might. As the kids got older, they had their own goals, but we had to plan from this place of optimism and hope that things could be better for that kid, whatever it looked like, whatever better was for them. And then we could, you know, have joy in that. Joy, feeling that success, baby steps. I always liked that in behavior too, like those successive approximations. We'll talk about that in a second, but that allowed us to acknowledge these and celebrate little pieces along the way, right? Because it's a marathon, right? We want to win the marathon, not just the race. So in planning, there's a lot of things that happen along the way, lots of little steps, and it's great when we can celebrate those little successes. So that, again, fuels our resilience. It gives us the will and the strength to keep going. And what is resilience? That's that capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, whatever that difficulty might be. There are some specific skills for resiliency that we know. They do a lot of research on resilience. People, you know, you hear about this all the time. You see two kids from the same family, and one of them takes, you know, they have a difficult life by any argument. And one kid, you know, goes on to become a doctor, and the other chooses a life of crime. And why is that? What is that about? There's a lot of research about grit lately, but also that it's that skill for resilience. That people can, what makes them able to push through it. And so there are some skills that they've identified: having competence, having positive coping skills. Coping skills are a funny thing too, because, you know, running down the street is a coping skill. Running out of the building, that's a coping skill. It's just not a positive coping skill. Everybody has coping skills. So I always laugh when they're like, this kid needs to develop coping skills. I'm like, well, they have them. And frankly, they're working for them. Like a lot of times, kids have coping skills to avoid things, and it is working for them. And it's working really well. It's not working for the rest of us, and it's not working to improve their education, but they've got skills that are working, right? So we want to develop positive coping skills, or what they call pro-social coping skills. So that's just a little distinction there. And then also to have confidence. You can't make change without having the confidence to, and when we talk about confidence too, we're talking about like risk-taking, putting yourself out there, because it is you're asking people to be vulnerable Yeah, I talked about coping skills and negative coping skills. When we're asking kids to change a behavior that's been working for them, and we're asking them to try something that's difficult, to try something that probably isn't going to get them the same immediate feedback that the other coping skill has been doing. And so we're really asking them to be vulnerable with people that they may not really know. I say that in therapy too, like when clients come in, we just have to acknowledge that it's a weird setup. And I say that as a therapist, but you're expecting somebody who's never met you before to come in and like share their deepest, darkest fears or their hopes. Even if it's positive, you're expecting them to come in and just, open up, because here's the room for it. And again, I say that as a therapist, but that's part of what we have to walk through. And we have to put that out there and be honest about it. Like, this is kind of a weird setup. And I know it seems weird, and probably you're here because your parents made you come, with teenagers. But we get through it. And because we have that connection, and that's what that's about too, so when we talk about competence, what does that mean? Because it doesn't mean you're the smartest, most educated person in the room. We talked about it, you have to be willing to take risks, right? So somebody who's competent knows what they want. And for parents, sometimes we have to sit down and figure that out. I mentioned that example of going into my son's meeting. Well, I'll tell you another one. So I did make that meeting with the teacher, and I calmed myself down first, and I went in. She had also sent an email, because I mentioned, it's that double E thing. So his grades weren't great, and it's, language arts is an area he's supposed to be really, really strong in. And I said, what is going on? We are having this, there's a disconnect between the work he's turning in and the grades that he's getting. And I don't usually worry too much about grades, but it was really out of the norm for him. And so she said, well, he's not putting forth effort. And, frankly, he's being a little lazy. So, I didn't like that very much as his mother. And so I went in, and one of the assignments too, he had said to me, Mom, I'm really proud of this. I want to show you. That's what finally pushed me over the edge for the meeting. He said, I'm really proud of this paper I wrote. I shared it with the class. I worked really hard on it. And he used the words, he's 11, I worked really hard on it. So I knew it mattered to him, and he wouldn't show me something he didn't think he'd worked hard on. And he got a failing grade on it. So that's when I was like, all right, so we're missing something here. So then I got the feedback that he was not putting forth effort and being lazy. And so scheduled that parent meeting. And I went in, and I'd started here really hot. But when I got there, I went, I had calmed down by now, because my goal was to find out what we could do to make it better, right? Because at the end of the day, I want him learning, and I want him performing at the level that he's capable of in this setting. So I said to her, though, in true, still to be myself a little bit. So as a behaviorist, I said, can you tell me what effort looks like and sounds like in your classroom? And I did. I said, what is he doing or not doing? And what does this look like and sound like in your classroom? And as she went through the things that he was doing and not doing in her room, I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds just like it. And it was just like I could see then exactly what she meant. So I had to be clear on what I wanted, and I had to focus on what mattered, which was the education. But also in that moment when I was in there, I had to connect with her on a personal level. And because at the end of the day too, I wanted her to know my son. And so I wanted her to know that while he has an individual plan that says he has to have preferential seating, for him, that doesn't have to be at the front of the room, because he does have a hard time focusing. So where is he sitting in the room? And is this the best possible place for him? And are we making the most of this environment in a way that allows him to access learning in the way that works for him? So the last part of competence, I set up here, keep it personal. And I know that we say all the time, oh, don't take it personally. It's not so personal. It is personal. First of all, what's more personal than your kids, right? It is personal. And also, when we know somebody, when we've connected with them, we approach it differently. And I think when I said, this is not what preferential seating for him doesn't need to be in the front. For him, he's 5'6", he's 11 years old, he can be in the back, but he needs to be away from the noises, and he needs to be able to hear what you're saying, and he's, different things. So I think it's very, very personal. When I counsel parents of kids and they're going into meetings for their kids, I always tell them, bring something with your child's picture if they haven't met them already. Make sure they know your child's favorite food. How does your child spend their free time? I think all of those things are an important part of the discussion when we're planning for our kids, even when you're talking about their educational goals. They need to know who your kid is and who they are as a person. because it matters. It just matters in how we approach them. There's all kinds of research about people feeling recognized. And again, that's connection. Those teachers that stand at the door and greet them every day, there's a reason principals are standing out there in the front when you come in, because it's about connecting with people as they come into their buildings. And so in that same way, and it might feel strange at first, it's a method of being vulnerable. Like we talked about, coming into counseling sessions and expecting to share. But when you go into those meetings with teachers and school staff, I invite you to share information about your children, because that keeps it personal. That makes them, it's not just about a plan on paper, and it's not just about writing goals. It's about the person, right? It's about what you want for them. It's about what matters to you. It's about what matters to them. And so it is personal. And we need to know, we as staff and anybody in the school needs to know who your child is as a person. Make sense? It is personal. And that's a huge part of connecting. Coping, and I think there's going to be a lot of sessions about, or at the end of the day, the big thing about this, this is so important. We need self-care. We all do. We would all love a massage once a week. I also recognize that that's not realistic. Okay, so even if we had the money, we just don't have the time either. So when we talk about coping skills and self-care, if you do nothing else today, then think about what that might look like for you. When I talk with anybody in any capacity, any adult, I'm always saying, what are you doing to take care of yourself? Sometimes that's just listening to a book in the car. Like, I think we need to be really intentional about what that is, and also intentional about planning for it in a way that's realistic. For me, I'm super social. I really value getting with my friends and the people in our life, and with people. So connection, obviously important to me, but I have to be intentional about in that planning and realistic about the fact that even when we say, okay, we're going to do this again in a month, that might not be realistic. We all have kids, we've got all these activities going on, so we're going to put something on the calendar for once every 3 months for this particular group gathering. But knowing that's out there, planning for it, that is part of my self-care. So whatever self-care looks like or feels like for you, it's really important that we be intentional about it, that we plan it, that we be realistic about something that you can follow through on, because it matters. We all need it. You can't be the best parent, the best teacher, the best advocate, the best whatever your role is if you're not well. So we need to take care of ourselves. And it is a catchphrase right now, like there are so many out there, but that idea of taking care of yourself really is essential. And it's important that we have tolerance and kindness toward others. I think the nature of being in this field, it's probably a part of who you are, but there are people that challenge that. There are situations that challenge that. Especially with things that we're going on. I mentioned that I work in a school that's highly transient. The school isn't transient. We have a lot of people that move in. Once they're there, they stay. It's a fantastic place, but we have a lot of kids right now that are coming in from other countries that are here without parents. They have gone through tremendous trauma, and it is horrific, and it is, unfathomable. I can't imagine. And some of the kids are, the age of my own children, and they're traveling here alone. And I mean, I could go on and on that. But what I say that to say that I have to be intentional about coming from this place of positivity, or that will weigh me down. And if I'm weighted with that, then I can't help them, which I believe is, part of what I'm there to do. So we have to take care of ourselves so that we can do the work that matters. So, and at the end of the day, I mentioned before that people do make mistakes. We're human. We're going to. So at the end of the day, remind yourself that you did your best today. And if we do that, then that's enough. It's a good day. You can't do, I say that to kids, like you can't do more than your best. So if you come in and you try and you've done your best, then that's all we can do. We can't do more than our best. So at the end of the day, remind yourself of that. When we talk about having confidence, it's important that we too use some of the things that we expect kids to do. Use positive self-talk, planning and problem solving. We have to have plans for things, otherwise they don't happen. And if we really really have no idea what we're doing, then we just have to fake it. We just have to keep on moving. And there's research about this. I know it sounds funny, and it sounds like I'm joking, and we always laugh when we say it, but we do sometimes have to just fake it. We talk about that when people are, feeling depressed and sad or anxious. Sometimes we have to push through. And I know that that's not, it sounds really easy, I'll just keep going, and it's not. But sometimes we have to just keep going, and it'll come to us. But we have to, if we don't have the answer, we'll work to find it. There might not be an answer, but we'll work to create one. So when we talked, I'm not suggesting you ignore what's going on and just put on a smile, but I'm saying we don't always have to have the answers right now, and we will make mistakes, and we aren't going to shut down because of it. We're going to keep moving. And so when we talk about faking it, it's that idea that we will continue to work on things, that we continue to try to find solutions, we continue to connect, we continue to build relationships, we continue to make changes. So we continue to just keep on learning and trying to do better. And also give yourself a little credit. Trust yourself. We know more than we do. We made it this far. Okay. And back to that thing about parenting, it is scary. On any given day, it's humbling. None of us have the right answer, and there's not a perfect way to do it. So, we're just working with it. So a couple of things we do know, just like that research talks about resiliency and things that do well, we also know that things are hard. And if we pretend that they're not, we're ignoring what's right in front of us. It will take time. Any change takes time. There's all kinds of formulas out there, like if someone's had a behavior that's working for them, it's going to take twice as long to fix it. So we tell teenagers the same about getting over somebody that you really, really like. If you dated them for 2 months, it's going to take you 4 months to get over them. But, there's all kinds of formulas out there. We need to, for every negative statement, you need to counteract it with 7 positives. There's all kinds of, but things are hard and things take time. Change doesn't happen overnight. But also know that you are not in it alone. As evidenced by coming here today, by tuning in today, by all of the people that are here to share information. The bulk of people here have committed their lives to this kind of work. Right? So you're not in it alone. That doesn't mean we have all the answers. It doesn't mean it's easy, but you're definitely not in it alone. And I like this quote here that says, there's no such thing as a perfect parent, so just be a real one. It's okay to admit mistakes. That's part of connecting too. And at the end of the day, when I opened, I said, I hope that there comes a time when the pandemic, the global pandemic and things shutting down isn't our point of reference, but that is where we are right now. We're 2.5 years out, right? So it's still very, very present in our lives. People are still recovering, if you will, for lack of a better word. It's just still a big part of things. And I think I'm working really hard to stop saying, when we get back there, or if things go back to the way they were, because I just think that's not realistic. And it's not about getting back to where we were before. And this is the true behaviorist in me. It's about where we are right now and what it's going to take to move forward. When we talk about connecting with people, one of the things that's really, really important, and I apologize if you've heard me talk before because I always work this story in somehow, but it's really, really important that we meet people where they are. And I talked about negative coping skills, right? Everybody's got coping skills. So I was working once with the school, and there was this adorable little second grader who was new to the building, and they had called me in because he was running away from the classroom. And he was running away every day. He couldn't make it through the day. He'd made really great friends with the office ladies, because I don't know if y'all know this, but really the office is not a bad place to be, okay? It's pretty inviting. They're nice to you up there. Nobody's gonna be rude. They almost always have suckers or something up there. They've got fidgets. So it's not a bad place if you're a little kid who's not being successful in the classroom, not feeling successful in the classroom. So they called us over, and as in my role, we were glad he's running somewhere and not through the halls, but because I'm not cut for running, but anyway, so we get over there and we're working with this kid and we're talking about his plan. And it wasn't that, it was hard for him to stay in the room. He had a lot of stressors and anxiety about being in the classroom, but he was a bright kid and he was capable of doing the work. And so the teacher, we had some things in the room that were appealing to him. And one of the things was a rowboat, big old-fashioned wooden rowboat filled with pillows. And when the kids finished their work, they could get permission to sit in this boat. So that was part of the plan we came up with, was that he would stay in the room, he would complete his work, and when he completed his work, he could sit in the boat. So we're about 3 weeks in, We've come up with this plan. So far, his best friend's the front office lady, and he likes the school counselor too, right? So we've got this plan. He goes into the room, he's working, and he's about halfway through their first assignment. He's made it through circle time, which is first thing in the morning. And now they're working, and he raises his hand to show the teacher, which is also a big thing because he liked to talk. But he actually, bless you, raised his hand, and the teacher came over and said, "Great job, you're working really hard." And he said, "I am, and I'm almost done. And when I'm done, I get to get in the boat, right?" And she said, "That's right, at the end of the day, when you've stayed in there all day and you've done all of your work, then you can get in the boat." And he looked at her and he said, "No deal," and he ran out of the room. So what would have happened if she had let him get in the boat at the end of that assignment? We would have had him, right? She would have had his buy-in. He was being vulnerable with her. He was in this situation that was uncomfortable for him. He was working really hard. He was working that plan. But she forgot to meet him where he was. She was looking at, and I know I said, have your eye on the end goal, but we got to remember there's a lot of steps in between. We need to meet them where they are. So when we talk about building connections and making these new connections, it's important we remember, here's where we are right now, right? So that little guy we would have had him if we'd have met him where he was and taken it in smaller chunks. So as we talk about moving forward today and building connections and reconnecting in some cases, remember to start where you are. And it's okay if we feel like it's a long way from where we need to be. That's fine, because we can't get there if we don't meet together and connect where we are right now. But it's also not about getting back to the way things were before. It's about where we are right now and what it's going to take to move forward. And that's all I got. Thank you.